Hey everybody. So, as human beings, we are all involved in one grand, encompassing search for meaning, a search that's both communal and deeply, deeply personal. The world is a scary, confusing, and often mysterious place, so how any one individual chooses to embark on this search for purpose and understanding is entirely their decision, and throughout the years we've seen all manner of methods. Some seek meaning through religion, through their belief in a force greater and wiser than themselves. They find a sense of peace and contentedness with those things that fall outside their own control. Others turn their eyes to the unexplained world around them, unsatisfied perhaps by their lack of understanding. They cast their nets into the endless expanse of the unknown universe, hoping to find something, anything that could provide them with the meaning they seek. And in this vast and ever-expanding world in which we live, it should come as no surprise that on occasion, these two pursuits may meet. A UFO religion is a creation of the 20th century, of an era in which the world was beginning to open up in ways never before seen. Traditional religious doctrine and principles are blended with a unique focus on modern paranormal and supernatural sensibilities, and an entire belief system is structured around the idea of extraterrestrial entities exerting their will on the people of planet Earth. Drawing from ancient religious scriptures, the occult, New Age mysticism, and a healthy dose of ufology, a surprising number of these movements have risen and fallen within the past century, and many still exist today. And on this dark Halloween night, we're going to be taking a look at a few. In February of 1954, a man named Ernest Norman and a woman named Ruth Nields were attending an early psychic convention in California. The pair had worked a series of odd jobs in their roughly 50 years of life, but had never before met each other, and were attending the convention purely out of individual interest in spiritualism, fortune-telling, and other such concepts. It would be later claimed that at this convention, after receiving a strange prophetic prediction from a clairvoyant, Ernest would meet Ruth Nields for the first time. The two were an immediate match, and after Ernest performed a past life reading on Ruth, claiming she had been the daughter of a pharaoh in a previous existence, Ruth and Ernest would enter into marriage and go into business as psychics. Ernest began to practice what he referred to as channeling, a process through which he would supposedly open his mind to beings on a higher plane of consciousness, beings that sought to guide humanity through the channeler. Ernest and Ruth would both go on to perfect the technique, giving lectures, reading past life experiences of clients, and writing numerous books of channeled information. These books, which Ernest claimed contained the wisdom of ascended beings residing on other planets and moons throughout the solar system, would eventually comprise the Gospel of the Unarius Academy of Science. Ernest took on the title of Unarius Moderator, while Ruth took on the name Ioshana, and together the pair began to attract a following for their California-based group. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, while he was its leader, Ernest would emphasize time and time again the scientific nature of their endeavor. The moderator stated that Unarius, a loose backronym standing for Universal Articulate Interdimensional Understanding of Science, was not a religion, although it incorporated a number of religious elements including reincarnation and spiritual medicine and healing. Rather, it was an organization devoted to teaching the core principles of the Unarian science of life. These principles, in essence, revolved around belief in a universal system of energy which permeated all human beings, belief that this energy permits reincarnation, through which notable figures like Jesus Christ were said to have been reborn, and above all, belief in the existence of higher dimensional beings who resided throughout Earth's solar system and beyond, many of whom were lying in wait for humanity to evolve into a higher state of intelligence so they could visit the planet and usher in a new age of progress and prosperity. From 1954 to 1971, with Ernest at its helm, the group attempted to do exactly this, keeping a fairly low profile while accumulating a small number of members and promoting the teachings of the ascended Space Brothers, as drawn from Ernest's channelings. In comparison to other UFO religions and New Age spiritual movements of the time, the core tenets and practices of Unarius during this period were quite reserved, focused primarily on spiritual healing, past life reading, and righting misdeeds made in former lives in order to nudge humanity towards its destiny of collective spiritual ascension. It was Ernest's belief that focusing too intently on the physical side of things, or saucer chasing, was nothing more than a form of escapism. But this was not to last. In 1971, Unarius moderator Ernest L. Norman would pass away due to bilateral pneumonia, and with his death, the Academy would begin to drift in a very different direction. His position in the group naturally transferred to Ruth, who had now begun to go by the name Uriel after experiencing a spiritual marriage to the Archangel Raphael, and under her leadership Unarius would begin to enter the spotlight. With Ernest gone and unable to perform channelings, the responsibility fell to her, and throughout the 70s she would take on two protégés to become sub-channels who aided her in authoring Unarian publications, and soon after the group would be opened much more fully to the public. Uriel, in stark contrast to Ernest, had always been partial to showmanship. If you've heard of Unarius before this point, the name has almost certainly been accompanied by images of Uriel in the bewildering, elaborate, and garish outfits she famously wore for events and appearances on TV. Uriel took on a decidedly more messianic persona and directed the group in a more fantastical direction. In 1974, she predicted the arrival of the extraterrestrial Space Brothers was imminent and purchased land in California in preparation, and although the beings failed to touch down in the fall of 1975, the Academy held firm and regrouped, continuing to make predictions and channel messages. Uriel continued to bestow loftier and loftier titles onto herself, crowning herself Spirit of Beauty and eventually Lord of the Universe, and group membership purportedly continued to increase during this time. Unarius had become somewhat of a cult of personality. Prospective members often came for Uriel, her dazzling public appearances and the writings of her subchannels, drawing several hundred members to the group's physical location by 1986, and converting several thousand remote members worldwide, if Unarius reports from the time are to be believed. And with this all-time peak in membership, Unarius would enter what some consider to be its golden age.
Come with me through this tunnel of stars. Here you will find worlds of cosmic love to which there is no end.
Throughout the late 70s and 80s, Unarius gained significant national notoriety through their production of home videos. Uriel would narrate and feature prominently in everything from simple explanations and interviews regarding the group's beliefs to dramatic recreations of past life experiences and simulated trips to distant planets, in which characters in outrageous costumes shared the screen with blinding, luminous amateur special effects and proclamations on the nature of reality. These unpolished but incredibly passionate presentations were broadcast on a number of public access channels and shared freely with any and all prospective members, acting essentially as promotion for the group and its ideals. Uriel would even appear on George Schlatters' Real People, a national program broadcast on NBC, bringing more fame to the group. And through these presentations, along with further channelings made by Uriel and her subchannels Charles Spiegel and Thomas Miller, the Gospel of Unarius was expanded far beyond Ernest Norman's original writings. And during this period, Uriel would make her greatest and in many ways her most final prediction. Years after the 1975 landing failed to materialize, and in keeping with many contemporary groups around this time, Uriel predicted the 33 vessels which would bear the Space Brothers to Earth would arrive in 2001, after the dawn of the new millennium. This concept wasn't new by any means, and such millenarian prophecies had been embraced by other notable groups like Heaven's Gate. But for some members of Unarius, these predictions and many of the more recent dealings of the group had just been too much. A schism had begun to grow in the Academy throughout the 1980s, largely between those members that subscribed to Ernest Norman's more metaphysical and reserved interpretations of the channelings, and those who backed Uriel and her subchannel's more recent predictions involving physical flying saucers and imminent world change. And these cracks in the unity of the group would only grow as, throughout the late 1980s and early 90s, Uriel began to grow worryingly ill. Uriel had predicted she would live to see the arrival of the Space Brothers in 2001, and Earth's subsequent enlightenment and induction into the Galactic Confederacy, but as years went by, this seemed less and less likely. Uriel began to drop out of the public eye, and following a hip injury in 1988 and a brief return to leading services, almost never appeared in person to Unarius members. By this point, leadership roles were largely filled by Charles Spiegel, who had taken on the name Antares after atoning for his negative past life energy, but without the credibility of Ernest or the charisma of Uriel, there was little he could do to assuage the uncertainty simmering beneath the surface of the group. And this only grew worse when, in July of 1993, Ruth Norman would pass away, and Uriel, the chosen channel of the Ascended Space Brothers, would pass away with her. Following this, members of the group were understandably shaken, and many left immediately after and in the years following, the same years leading up to Uriel's previously predicted landing date. Some members left to practice a denomination of the Unarian faith more in line with Ernest's original teachings. Others left due to their shattered faith in the Academy. But regardless of the reason, by the time the new millennium rolled around, membership had dwindled to around 25, most located in the group's still-standing headquarters in El Cajon, California. And of course, when the prophesized date came and went without incident, the Unarius Academy of Science folded further in on itself. Antares passed away roughly a year before this date, and in the years following, the now greatly diminished Unarius has been led by an oversight council of individuals who divined their right to govern by channeling the wishes of Antares and Uriel, who had of course become Space Brothers themselves. The group maintains a limited membership, and their headquarters remain open for any wandering souls who seek enlightenment within its walls. In addition, they maintain an online presence with their surprisingly well-designed website and YouTube channel, which I'd highly recommend for anyone interested in the topic. And so continues, in a very quiet way, the story of the Unarius Academy of Science.
Although some sources say otherwise, it's widely understood that George King was working as a London taxi driver at the time of his enlightenment. One Sunday morning in 1954, the then 35-year-old man claimed he was visited by an otherworldly voice which told him, "Prepare yourself. You are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament." A few days after receiving this powerful message, which came to be known as the Command, an allegedly world-renowned yet to this day unnamed yoga master entered King's sealed apartment and instructed King on a variety of mystical spiritual practices. This master then instructed him to form a society of individuals devoted to inducing positive change to the planet through these spiritual means. From this point onward, King would become the primary terrestrial mental channel, a cosmic receiver for mental transmissions from extraterrestrial ascended beings within Earth's solar system. And it was from these transmissions and teachings that in 1955, George King would found the Etheria Society. The society's name was derived from the master Aetherius, a being hailing from Venus who sent King his initial command in 1954. King would receive further such messages, referred to as cosmic transmissions or mental transmissions depending on their form in the coming months and years, through a technique referred to as a yogic somatic trance. King would receive these messages and speak them, sometimes in private and sometimes in public, slowly amassing a small amount of followers whom he would speak to when he rented space in London's popular Caxton Hall. King would also establish the Aetherius House on Fulham Road in 1958, which would serve as the group's Europe headquarters from then on. King preached a form of reincarnation, stating that the ascended masters he received the communications from were once human beings who had mastered the cycle of reincarnation and chosen to continue helping humanity. Some of these masters, like Swami Vivekananda and Count Saint-Germain, originated on Earth and chose to stay there spiritually, but others, like Aetherius and Mars Sector 6, referred to as Cosmic Masters, resided beyond Earth's atmosphere. They transmitted their messages to King from far-off planets and moons throughout the solar system. Some Cosmic Masters were said to have been reborn on Earth as cosmic avatars. Such avatars included Buddha, Lao Tzu, and of course Jesus Christ, who was known to speak through George King himself in times of need. Shaped by these messages, Aetherius formed a complex belief system influenced by systems of karma and spiritual healing. All beings were said to contain a divine spark, and the ultimate goal of devotees was to eventually ascend to a state of divinity through practicing yoga, devoting themselves in service to others, and channeling spiritual energy towards positive change. However, as is par for the course, Aetherius' belief system also included some decidedly non-standard elements. The Earth itself was believed to be a living cosmic being who was performing an act of self-sacrifice by providing for the human race, an initiative that Aetherius was committed to supporting. In addition, entire civilizations of ascended beings living on a higher state of vibration were said to exist on planets throughout the solar system, whom the society was said to cooperate directly with. Said entities were said to be part of a cosmic hierarchy of beings, and had allegedly visited the planet in their spacecraft throughout several millennia of human existence, although there existed a shadowy group of individuals dedicated to suppressing these sightings and messages from cosmic beings. Perhaps most interestingly, Aetherius attempted to act as a unifying doctrine, a bridge between all major religions, which were said to have all originated from different interpretations of the same cosmic masters and teachings. Virtually all major religious figures were explained under Aetherius as various incarnations and avatars of cosmic masters throughout the ages, and all the miracles they performed were stated to be manifestations of their diminished but still significant spiritual energies. The Aetherius Society proposed itself to be the answer to all mysteries, the holder of all spiritual knowledge, and the eventual saviour of the people of planet Earth, and with George King at their head, the society continued to develop. This development would soon outgrow the confines of Caxton Hall. In the June of 1959, King would depart the UK and make a journey to Southern California for a UFO convention, and upon arriving he would establish Los Angeles as the new headquarters city for Aetherius, living in the state for the remainder of his life. Whilst in America, King would see the group rise to the height of its popularity, twice appearing on the Tom DeGan show and receiving a transmission on one of the occasions. The group was incorporated as a non-profit in November of 1960, and a few years later, King would purchase a building at 6202 Afton Place to serve as a permanent international HQ, which remains as such to this day. The new facility featured specialised rooms that King himself had designed, including a soundproof one specifically for the act of receiving transmissions, an act for which King often required complete darkness and silence. The leader of Aetherius was in fact known to invent his own devices and systems. He designed and constructed several of what he referred to as radionics apparatuses, most notably his spiritual energy radiator, which drew energy from an extraterrestrial craft and disseminated it throughout Earth, and his spiritual battery, a device designed to mechanically store spiritual energy gathered by Aetherius members. And these devices would in fact be used during one or more of what the Society called its cosmic missions. Perhaps the most well-known of the cosmic missions was Operation Starlight. Beginning in 1958 and spanning 3 years, King and his acolytes would climb 18 mountains all over the world, with the goal of charging them with spiritual energy to radiate throughout the world. Stones from each of these mountains would be harvested and gathered at the group's Los Angeles temple for their main altar. Other missions included Operation Sunbeam, where energy from extraterrestrial beings was channeled through King's devices and into planet Earth, and the ongoing Operation Space Power and Space Power 2, where the group routinely engages in spiritual pushes, drawing energy from a hidden spacecraft called Satellite Number 3 and into King's spiritual energy radiators. Spiritual pushes have been orchestrated by the group 4 times a year since 1988, and are intended to continue for the next 1,000 years if all goes according to plan. Interestingly, when George King passed on at the age of 78 in 1997, the group didn't die out as did most similar groups around the same time period. Prior to his death, he had signed a series of formal and informal decrees enabling the group to continue its missions and its contact with ascended masters in his absence. And after his death on July 12th of that year, a funeral was held in Santa Barbara which was reportedly attended by upwards of 100 Aetherius members from across the world. In the following years, the Aetherius Society has continued its practices and maintains an unknown but reasonable number of members scattered around the world. The Los Angeles Temple remains open to the public, and the Society has not one but two operational websites boasting astoundingly detailed documentation of the group's history and inner workings. To this day, the group continues to engage in its rituals, which, if they are to be believed, do more than their part to keep the world spinning round.
On April 4th of 1947, a man named Alan Noonan was elevated on a painter's truck, painting a billboard in a remote location near his home in Long Beach. At around 2 in the afternoon, the sky suddenly grew dark, and Noonan was struck with an otherworldly experience that would change his life forever. A blinding, luminous shaft of what he described as ultraviolet light entwined with gold threads enveloped his body, and his being was transported into a ship in orbit. There he was shown the outcome of his entire life, and became acquainted with beings who were said to be the guiding spirits of humanity, as part of a transcendental experience, and he would soon be introduced to a being known as the Great Galactic Being, a manifestation of the entire galaxy, who spoke in a commanding voice accompanied by a brilliant beam of light. The voice of the galaxy asked Noonan if he would become the spiritual comforter, tasked with bringing truth to the world. Alan Noonan, of course, agreed. He then returned to Earth and, after changing his name to Alan Michael in honor of the Archangel, he set out on the path that would eventually lead him to found the One World Family Commune, and by extension, the Universal Industrial Church of the New World Comforter. Soon after this encounter, despite interpersonal issues it had caused between him and his family, Alan Michael would go on to become very invested in the burgeoning UFO community, attending a number of conferences and networking with major ufologists of the time. Similarly to other group leaders discussed earlier tonight, Michael would also begin to interpret messages, which he believed originated from the universal mind of ETI, or extraterritorial intelligence, emphasizing belief in extraterrestrial life, spiritual energy, and reincarnation, with an added focus on communism and communal living. Michael would open a popular art cafe in Long Beach called the House of Meditation, and would found a small number of communal living projects, but all of these were eventually abandoned after attracting what Michael would describe as problematic individuals. In 1967, Michael allegedly received a telepathic communication from the ETI, instructing him to travel to San Francisco, in the area of which he would remain for the coming years. Michael opened a vegan natural food store and restaurant called the Mustard Seed, and in association with the restaurant, founded the One World Family Commune. The commune, which had membership between the high tens and low hundreds throughout the early 60s and 70s, was composed primarily of young people from around the San Francisco area who had become disillusioned with the current state of society and had decided to begin living in what they viewed as a more naturalistic way, as was the case with many communes around this time. But unlike many other contemporary movements, the One World Family Commune had a faith of its own. Members of the commune were often adherents of the Universal Industrial Church of the New World Comforter, officially founded a few years after the commune's founding in 1973. The church proposed that Alan Michael was the New World Comforter, loosely based around the concept of the Holy Spirit in the Christian Bible, and that he had been placed on Earth to channel the truths of the universe from the universal mind of ETI, which was variably called the God Mind. These teachings were, in theory, meant to bring about a new age on planet Earth of universal care and equity for all living beings. But at least when compared to the others we've discussed tonight, their beliefs were complex and often contradictory. While difficult to explain without running through the entirety of Alan Michael's nearly 400-page novel, The Everlasting Gospel, the general purpose of the faith was to put into effect the teachings of the ETI, as telepathically interpreted and transcribed by Michael, which included ending war and teaching humanity how to obtain positive karma and reattune themselves with the naturally harmonic state of the universe. Doing so would supposedly usher in a new age of prosperity, after which humanity would be able to join an interstellar community known as Galactica. The commune would grow throughout the Bay Area during the 1970s, opening several new restaurants and establishing commune branches, and would attain media attention when, in the early parts of the decade, Oakland Raiders linebacker Chip Oliver departed the team to join the group. Later on, the commune would shift to Berkeley, its final location, where it would rent a residence formerly owned by a UC Berkeley fraternity. This would be the group's most active period, supported largely by a series of restaurants, stores, and community centers throughout the area, and dividends from the federal government. During this time, they would publish cookbooks, perform and publish music through one or more of their 3 official bands, and practice yoga and group sexual activity. By 1976, the commune maintained roughly 100 members between its central Berkeley location and a remote group in Honolulu, Hawaii. But this would turn out to be its peak. Throughout the end of the 1970s and the early 1980s, the commune and the church would decline in membership, dwindling to around 20 by 1980. That year, Alan Michael would run for President of the United States as the only candidate of the Utopian Synthesis Party, and would unfortunately lose the vote to Ronald Reagan, despite his promises of printing money and ending all debts. And as time continued to march on, the group only further shrank in on itself. The One World Family Commune shrunk to around 13 members into the new millennium. Many of its restaurants and community centers were sold and converted by other groups, and the dwindling collection of members moved from Berkeley to Stockton to DC to Maui and eventually Santa Rosa. Today, unlike the others mentioned, the commune has no physical location, and their online presence, along with a handful of scattered members, are all that remains of the Universal Industrial Church of the New World Comforter. Alan Michael himself passed away at age 93 in 2010, at which point group membership was believed to be 4 commune members, with around 6 living independently. What exactly happened to these members after his death is entirely unknown, although at least one member can be found on LinkedIn, presumably still practicing the faith. Someone presumably maintains their still active site, although at this point it's entirely unclear for how long this will remain the case. And with this, we'll end off for the night. There is no right way to find purpose and meaning in the world. What works for one individual may not work for another, and vice versa. What a human being needs to feel fulfilled in life is not, and has never been, something so simple it can be generalized to an entire population. While the practices of the individuals we visited tonight might seem strange or bizarre to an outside observer, they've clearly meant something to them, and have been a defining influence in many lives. We are all born with a deep-seated fear of the unknown. So if these wayward souls have been able to look out into the infinite universe around them and truly find something that helps them come to terms with it, then I wish them Godspeed and safe travels as they streak their own vibrant path across the night sky of their lives. And I wish the same to you, whoever you may be, and hope that this Halloween night finds you happy, healthy, and maybe just a little bit existential. Either way, good night everybody, and happy Halloween.